On the panel, we have Franek Wieczorka, who's a senior advisor to Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, who's the president-elect of Belarus. He's also a non-resident fellow at the Atlantic Council's Eurasia Center, and he's a journalist. He's also a speaker and writer about democracy and about Belarus politics. He has, for his pains, has been in jail more than once. So he has a lot of experience. We also have Dr. Alexander Gerasimenko, who is a postdoctoral researcher at the Oxford Internet Institute, which, if you don't know it, is one of the really, really interesting places in Europe where they're looking at the intersection between the online world and politics. He studies how digital media is used in authoritarian countries. He specializes in social movements, political organizing, information manipulation, computational propaganda, and data science. And I think probably everybody on this call agrees that those are all hugely relevant to the subject at hand. Finally, we have Hanna Lubakova. She's also a freelance journalist from Belarus. She's a non-resident fellow with the Atlantic Council. She works as a media trainer and mentor. She was a recipient of the Václav Havel Journalism Fellowship at Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, as well as the World Press Institute Fellowship in the US. So these are really three distinguished people. I've followed all of them on Twitter. Franek and Hannah have been filing from the ground over the last couple of months, and both know the situation there very well. I'm actually going to start with them, and just for people who are joining who don't know the background, I'm going to just spend a few minutes at the very beginning talking about how we got to where we are today, before kind of plunging into the technical issues that I'm sure interested you. And I will, we'll have a conversation among ourselves for the first part of the session, and then I will turn to questions and bring questions in, and I will please put your questions in the chat box. We'll go for about an hour and 15 minutes. We'll see how it goes. If there's a hot discussion going, we can take a few extra minutes. If everybody's tired, it's late here on Eastern European Standard Time. Then we can end earlier as well. But Franek, let me start with you, because prior to this year, Belarus was not known for mass street demonstrations. Can you give us, would you mind giving the audience a kind of potted history of the efforts made by the Belarus opposition in the past? Lukashenko has been in power for 25 years, for 26 years? And during that time has effectively abolished any remnants of a democratic, even of an illusory democratic state. So there's no independent judiciary, there are no checks and balances. He has a kind of complete control of the state in a way that's actually quite unusual, even in the post-Soviet world. And there hasn't been a huge amount, at least, of visible opposition up until now. What was the opposition scene look like? What did it look like before this year?
Yeah, you're absolutely right that for 26 years, Lukashenko managed to build a power vertical which is entirely dependent on him, which is built by him, designed for him, and aimed to protect him. And this is the reason why these protests are so strong, but they do not bring any real changes, because the power vertical cannot transform easily. All this KGB, OMON, law enforcement agents protecting Lukashenko's presidential palace for 6 weeks in a row, they were built from scratch by Lukashenko since he came to power in '94. People were protesting before and after president. This protest led to the huge political change. Lukashenko always managed somehow to suppress the mobilized, put leaders in the jail, and after a few months, everything went back to the normality. But this year was very different because of several mistakes. First of all, he made huge mistake during the COVID crisis, and I compare COVID crisis to Kuropatki in '80s, when the Stalin's crimes were revealed, and many people were angry on Soviet regime because of the lies, communist lies. The same about COVID. People are angry that Lukashenko were hiding a number of victims from people. The second, he underestimated the opposition forces, and he underestimated women in particular. He put in jail all the male candidates. He left female on the stage, and female politicians managed to unite forces and mobilize the society. And the third, he underestimated the technology and the media. He put so much money every year into the traditional television, printed press, etc., and suddenly Telegram popped up, emerged, and Telegram provided the opposition, civil society activists with absolutely uncontrolled and uncensored platform for talking to people directly. So now we can communicate to millions of Belarusians without any mediators, without any permissions or licenses, which is quite cool. And all these factors, they create the critical mass, which came to the streets on August 9. Not just political activists, but all the people not happy with the Lukashenko's regime. Lukashenko tried to crack down on them brutally. And this was the last mistake he made. If he wouldn't be so brutal on August 9, 10, and 11, perhaps this 7 weeks uprising would not happen. People came to the streets after, not just against Lukashenko, but also against the police and brutality that they...
Hannah, would you like to pick up on that? You know, a lot of people have commented on the role of women, the 3 women leaders during the presidential campaign. Is there something about the quality of leadership that's different this time? Is it you know, there have been presidential elections in Belarus in the past. There have been candidates who've run, but none who've had this kind of following. To what do you attribute it?
Yes, indeed. I think that was one of his mistakes. As Franek said, Lukashenko made those mistakes before he allowed Tatiana Karatkevich to run for the presidency in 2015, 5 years ago. She was an alternative candidate. She was in the opposition, and because he did not feel that she is a strong candidate, she's a strong rival, right? So that was the same logic. Lukashenko allows weak politicians, weak candidates to run against him. This time it didn't work out for several reasons. I think it both because of the people, and it would be actually interesting to focus on this more. But Svetlana Tikhanovskaya as a rival, is a kind of new political novice, new politician in Belarus, managed to unite the country because she was empathetic to the people. She talked to them. She didn't have any background in politics, but it also what kind of made people like her. She did not want power. She just wanted to kind of understand, you know, what people think, and she traveled across the country. She gathered these massive rallies everywhere, basically, and I followed it, and I kind of saw how people admired her. She became more than just a symbol, and she was also kind of growing herself as a politician, right? Her story was also what made people empathetic towards her because, well, she was threatened that her children would be taken away, and that was that was something that made people angry because, you know, this injustice, this cynicism from the authorities. So they kind of wanted to support her, and well, her husband is also jailed, right? So all these kind of outrageous things that happened to her made people also kind of feel, you know, that they want to support her. She's also, again, the fact that she's new in politics was very important because, well, many people have become tired of the old mainstream opposition, and when they saw this, you know, 3 women, Tikhanovskaya, Veronika Tsepkalo, Maria Kolesnikova, who managed to unite so quickly in basically 15 minutes, as they said, and that's what also that's what also people liked. So yeah, that was a new quality. That was a kind of difference from all these fights that the old mainstream opposition used to have before. The kind of fact that these are women. People also kept saying that, well, Lukashenko, criticized women. He said that, oh, she's a poor thing, she would collapse, she would not be able to become a president. And well, at the same time, he's not kind of capable himself because of all these, crises, all these problems in the country. So there were also, people were also angry by what Lukashenko said about women and about female leadership. So these are kind of all this is a number of reasons why people like her and wanted to vote for her and finally elected her as president. But it also lies in people themselves, in their mobilization.
So it's the, I mean, Franek says it's the, this use of brutality, the attacks on women, on her in particular, as well as the appeal of a non-political opposition, which, and the picture of unity that gave people the feeling that something was different this time. And as you say, the atmosphere of the COVID crisis as a background. Alexander, you had in the past written about the ways in which Belarus and Russian dissidents were using the internet and were using social media in some original ways. And sort of before we get to the exact question of Telegram and how it's been used in Belarus, and we'll explain why that's significant. I mean, Franek has already hinted at it. Would you tell us a little bit about your research and what it was that you found? Also, just to give people a little bit of the background as to how it is that people are using technology in that part of the world and what makes it different.
Yeah, indeed. It's a good question, how people use technologies for to advance or to advocate for some democratic sort of goals and values. And in one way, people use technologies in Belarus in a very similar way as everyone uses all around the world. But obviously, there are some restrictions. Some of them are quite severe. Some of them look pretty nasty and unusual for people, for instance, in the West. People who active politically, who have some political sort of ideas, and they are not the same as the ideas of the government, they often face things like censorship, or it mostly takes a form of self-censorship on social media when people are just afraid to express politically themselves because of fear of persecution. People face surveillance when people, activists or just ordinary citizens who discuss politics, they might be tracked, they might be looked at by special service, police and so on. They might be harassed by the police for expressing their political thoughts. They might be persecuted as well in some quite rare cases. It happened. So against all those obstacles and challenges of online activism, people really need to sort of be creative, and the people of Belarus were quite creative recently, I would say. About 3 years ago, there was a large movement that I think somehow preceded the current events in a way. It was mostly about, it revolved around economic issues, but it evolved very fast into a very much political movement. It was about a very absurd tax on unemployment that had been imposed by the government 3 years ago. People protested, and it resulted in the first wave ever seen until this year of large-scale protest. And it was mostly a protest that involved not just capital or larger cities, but also quite small or middle-sized towns. And we didn't see this type of thing until 2017. And this wave of protest was very much mobilized using digital technologies, not Telegram those days, but just social media mostly as well. Maybe those days it was more Russian-made social media, not social media that commonly used across, say, Western Europe or US, not Facebook, but rather something called VK of Kontakte and other type of platforms. And those days, I think during that period, many activists learned how to quickly politicize online space. So just yesterday, people using social media to learn about their friends, cats, and other nice stuff, and suddenly social media feed becomes very political. And I think that's what partly happened this time as well. So 3 years ago, people learned how to do this, and this time activists applied their knowledge. And it was about politicizing people, politicizing media space. It's about avoiding surveillance, and to avoid surveillance, many of them try to anonymize themselves. I found that it's a very crucial feature of technologies that provides people with anonymity opportunities. Telegram in particular is quite good at that. And also technologies allow people to sort of build less centralized and less hierarchical structures if they want to build a movement or build a civic organization. And that's why we now observe, I think, partly because of reliance on technologies, we observe very much horizontal, I call it segmented movement in Belarus. Movement that is not connected very much, ties between different segments. Groups are quite weak and invisible, and that's what protects them. That's what helps them to avoid surveillance and avoid persecution. So I think in a way, we observe quite an innovative type of civic organizing, anti-authoritarian civic organizing in Belarus. That's what I found previously, and the current movement confirms what we've seen in Belarus 3 years ago.
Can I ask you two follow-up questions, and maybe Veronica and Hannah have views about this too. One really important criticism that's been made of the use of social media in protest movements is that, and you actually just hinted at it, is that it doesn't create the strong ties that you have from traditional forms of organizing, you know, where people know each other, they see each other, they have deep contacts. It creates exactly what you just said, weak ties in which, and people can kind of join or not join, and it's often felt that these kinds of protests don't last long because they, you know, people haven't been somehow socialized with one another and aren't able to create a strong movement. And that's the first criticism that's made. And the second criticism is that it's proved pretty easy in a lot of places for authoritarian regimes to flood the zone, as they say, to undermine and to overwhelm online movements with disinformation and actually even just extra information, so that people become very confused about where is the narrative, what's true and what's not true, and this online organizing has often faltered because of that. Why hasn't that happened? How do you answer those two questions in Belarus, and why hasn't the latter happened?
Yeah.
Great
question.
About this too. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Just quickly for the first one, I'll say this critique. I think it also relates to what's been called selectivism or collectivism. This collectivism critique right. By Morozov. Morozov is ironically, in fact, from Belarus, one of the authors of the theories. Mm-hmm. I think they've been kind of proved not really sort of related to reality over the last 10 years, I would say, specifically when it comes to authoritarian countries. So this critique firstly been applied to Western states. In countries like Belarus, I think, even little act of clicking and sharing is in itself a political act, and not just in authoritarian states, but in countries where you can be persecuted for sharing political story. Collectivism is not something that should be criticized as not activism. And in relation to ties, I think, as I mentioned, I think actually weaker ties is an advantage in a situation where Belarus found itself, where previously many authoritarian countries found itself, because weaker ties means you are not that much linked to other groups within, say, movements or within civic society. And it means that if one group been persecuted, investigated, if it was semi-anonymous group, for instance, it's been found, but if it has very weak links with other groups, it means it's maybe hard to trace other groups as well. So you can remove 1-2 group, but you cannot really reveal the whole movement very quickly. Not quickly. Maybe you take time for that. And for the second one, I think, that's one of the key things I study right now at Oxford, and how government of Belarus tries to manipulate online space. And we so far found little evidence of that. In fact, in terms of use of social media, in terms of use more advanced tactics such as computational propaganda, for instance. It's not really been used that much by government in Belarus. One of the reasons why I think, well, maybe they're not just they're relying on more sort of traditional ways of trying to manipulate people with traditional media. Television is fully controlled by the state in Belarus, for instance. So in a way, maybe that's one of the reasons. Another reason might they just well, to build propaganda instruments, you need to actually also follow this kind of decentralized logic. You need to invest in less centralized, less hierarchically controlled structures. And I think Belarusian government might be just not really able to do that. So just there is no capacity so far. It might rely on the Russian capacity, and it seems like they're going to do it in the future, but not at the moment that much.
Mm-hmm. Franek, when I spoke to you a month or so ago, we talked about Telegram, and we were talking about this aspect of it. I mean, could you also walk our group through the history of Telegram and why it became the medium that was most used by the Belarusian opposition and by journalists, and give us some, because I think that may be part of the answer to the same question. So why hasn't the Belarusian government been able to use disinformation to shut it down? And by the way, I do see the questions coming up in the chat. These are great, and we'll bring some of them onto the main talk too. But Franek, go ahead.
Yeah. So first of all, Telegram was created by the Durov brothers, who know very well how social media work and what people are really looking for on the internet.
For those who don't know, yeah.
They're Russian. In general, most of their life they were anti-Putin, let's say, and their idea was to create the space of freedom where people can communicate freely, openly, and securely at the same time. And they created Telegram, and the idea of Telegram is to create the space with the very basic features which allow you to communicate or to broadcast the messages or to communicate to your friends or allies or neighborhoods in the chats. Telegram belongs to so-called deep web, the part of the internet which is not open for Google. There is the World Wide Web, public web, which can be Googled, and there is part of the internet like closed group, closed circles, messengers, Viber, Telegram, Line, etc., which cannot be Googled. So only people who belong to this channel, who belong to this group, they have access to. So this creates the feeling of security, and people create safe places on these apps. And Telegram has the feature which was not, which was only very unique at this platform, the feature of broadcasting. WhatsApp allowed to broadcast only to 200 people. Line didn't allow to broadcast at all. Facebook Messenger at all. It was like very, very, very traditional in this sense. And Telegram allowed you to create the broadcast list with dozens of thousands of people. And you, without investment any dollars, you can create the subscribe list with thousands of people receiving your message directly as notifications to phone. And I often compare broadcasting on Telegram with the radio broadcasting. Through the radio in the wartime, you were able to broadcast to millions of people, and they are synchronically receiving your message. Same time, you can broadcast on Telegram, and you don't just inform people. You create the common agenda for all the people who follow your Telegram channel, which is quite cool and which opened fantastic opportunities for markets where no free media existed, like Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, Belarus, Ethiopia. And these are countries where Telegram is leading.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Hanno, what do you think? What's the attraction of Telegram? So when I started following it, one of the things that really struck me about it was the way in which people, it creates a kind of community in that people send in pictures of themselves, and then they can see themselves being rebroadcast, and they can also watch their compatriots, marching and demonstrating and doing things at the same time. So it's almost like, even though you're in Minsk, you can see people demonstrating and protesting all over the country. And it creates it's almost like an alternative television or an alternative community. What's your explanation for why people have found it so useful in Belarus?
Before the election, it was useful and kind of attractive because of these safety. And that's why people kind of started using it, and not only in Belarus, but basically, well, in other countries as well, right? During the election, after the election, it became so popular because it was the only messenger that was possible basically to use, you know, when the internet was shut down. So, so the choice was made, you know, kind of, it was a consequence of this internet shutdown in the first place. So I would only add actually to, I think what Alice said was really important, because, well, this is not about a platform, a kind of concrete, you know, Telegram platform, Telegram messenger. 3 years ago, it was actually YouTube, it was VK. As Alice mentioned, this was a kind of number of other platforms. In 2011, when there was another revolution through social media, as it was called, it was also, I think, Contacti, it was this VK. So these were just platforms that were adopted because they were popular at some point. And, you know, it's just because Telegram now is safer to use. And let me just add, kind of, I think it might be important. Propaganda might not be, to this question about propaganda, it might not be indeed that kind of widespread by the government at this moment, but surveillance is widespread. They literally observe, monitor chats in Telegram. And that's also kind of dangerous. It might be a safer place for people, but the authorities are there as well. And they kind of arrest people for being in those chats, you know, belonging to those chats and kind of sharing messages and so on. So this is kind of safe, but at the same time, they have, you know, the authorities have their tools to kind of, you know, absorb and monitor these activities.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. I mean, Franek, I remember one of the things you told me when we spoke, and then afterwards I went to meet him and I had a similar conversation. We talked about Nekta, which is this one Telegram channel run by a 22-year-old, you know, basically student who lives in Warsaw and who's outside the country. And one of the things that you told me, and then he also confirmed this, is that, or he agreed that that could be an explanation. One of the reasons why many people began following his channel, which has something like, it's now 2.5 million followers, something in that area. One of the reasons people began following him was that they knew he was out of the country. In other words, and they knew, therefore, that the authorities couldn't get hold of his telephone. And so, therefore, it was safe to send him messages.
Yeah.
So
And that's,
paradoxically, although he wasn't in Minsk, he was a safer conduit for information and a safer thing to watch, because it wouldn't fall, his phone wouldn't, literally his telephone wouldn't fall into the hands of the police. I don't know whether you think that's correct.
No, that's absolutely correct. And the most important people who are sending the information, and this is the major source of success of Telegram channels, the user-generated content. When people know who is behind this channel, when people know that this person is in the safe place and it's not KGB agent sitting in Minsk downtown, they share the video pictures much more actively. If they wouldn't be sure so much who is behind. And Stepan Putila, who is behind Nekta, he was the only person who revealed his name, because other major pro-democratic channels of Telegram, they don't reveal the names of their authors. We know that the administrator of Belarus of the Brain channel is in the prison, Igor Losik, right now. He's a good friend of Alexander, Hanna, and me. And after he was jailed, people didn't know who are behind this channel, and they stopped sharing the videos and photos, and they switched entirely to Nekta, because at least they knew that Nekta is a good guy. And Nekta is a good guy. Actually, he studied the same underground lyceum which Hanna and I graduated from. This is the real underground school which still exists in Minsk, near Minsk. And our idea was to create something like of me and my colleagues to support Nekta and other Telegram channels with a group of people who will be sharing these videos. And my personal goal during this electoral campaign was to find the guys in the field during the protest who will be sending these videos. And somehow we found a way to motivate these people to share videos. This is why you could see on Nechta channel and other channels so much exclusive content, because they know for sure that their content will be published.
Mm-hmm. Alexander, can we talk a little bit about the safety of Telegram as well, and also the reasons why Lukashenko found it so hard to shut down? You know, what's the technical explanation for that? And do you feel confidence in the owners of Telegram? Are they? I mean, these are Russians. I mean, they're okay. They say they're anti-Putin. You know, what is your feeling of confidence in the people who run it and the safety of using it? There's actually a question here from Alexander Solovyov, who says ordinary chats in Telegram are no longer safe as they used to be a couple of years ago. Only secret chats are reliable, Signal as well. And he says he lives in Russia and ordinary chats are leaking. Have you thought at all about the security of Telegram and the as I say, the background of it?
Right, yeah. So first of all, obviously, as been mentioned, Telegram is important in terms of its arrangements for anonymity, for security. Anonymity, first of all. So when you register, you provide a phone number. It might be just any phone number from the internet. There are services you can use. You insert that phone number and that's it. You don't need to provide your name. It doesn't really encourage you to reveal your name or your profile picture like Facebook does or many other platforms. On YouTube, you really need to show your face to talk, right? If you would like to have a blog or something. On Instagram, moreover. Telegram is very different. It doesn't encourage people to be anonymous. And then, obviously, people under those nicknames, they can broadcast, as Franek suggested, using various affordances. And from that perspective, it looks quite safe. Once people reveal their name, they might, when they register, they just reveal their name, or they just might use a phone number which is registered in Belarus, and if the government somehow can track that underneath that nickname, if this phone number is linked to this nickname, then in that case, person might be traced. So in fact, it always depends on the user, how kind of advanced they are in terms of organizing their security. Yeah, if they think about security when they register on those platforms, that they might be more protected, I think. For instance, now Telegram refuses to register any account under any Chinese number at all, because Chinese number is surveilled even even more intensively than Belarusian phone numbers. When it comes to kind of this technical arrangements, why Telegram isn't blocked or is blocked, we know that Russia has been trying to block it for like how many? 2 years, even more than 3 years, about 2 years. Recently, it abandoned this attempt. So it tried to block it after Navalny campaign in Russia 2017-18, used it very actively, also for a very similar way to organize local protests around the country. It was very successful then. They tried to block it. They were not successful. And it's because obviously there are some specific, very technical arrangements that have been applied by Telegram. And we don't really know exactly how it been, what was the secret, because if we knew the secret, maybe everyone would try to replicate. In fact, Belarusian government tried to block Telegram 1 month ago, immediately after the election, during the internet shutdown. It lasted about 61 hours, and it was partly successful. It was more successful than the Russian government, in fact. They used something called deep pocket inspection technology that actually analyzes all traffic that goes through your browser and kind of cuts unwanted traffic. But yeah, anyway, and but Telegram pretends that it's not really Telegram; it's something else, and it pretends that it's, I don't know, a site about cooking, or it's about a site about cars, yeah. And that's how it's partly kind of managed to get through Belarusian censorship into people's smartphones. It's one of the ways, but it's not the only one, clearly. And it also leads to the last sub-question you asked, is question whether we should trust owners. We never should trust owners of any platform, I believe, because they create them for some purpose, for personal, normally just to make money, right? In case of Durov, who created the platform, I think his key benefit, he didn't earn money directly from platform at the moment, because it's not, there is no way kind of to monetize it, but he tried, but he failed, in fact, because the US government applied certain legislation against him. But Durov gained a lot of benefits in terms of kind of elevating his profile in the West. Before he created Telegram, he was known only in Russian-speaking countries. Now he's known globally. And that's what actually, I think, partly explains why he's so interested in promoting Telegram. And also his personal ideology, he kind of follows this idea of libertarianism. He called himself a libertarian. Kind of might also partly explains why he's sort of so keen on helping freedom fighters across the world. So I would trust him to some degree, and at least he's not the worst platform owner in the world. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great competition. Who's the worst platform owner in the world? And I don't know even how we judge that one. I mean, there's another technical question here from Maj Al-Shahabi, which tell me which one of you would like to take it. Which is, it says the crypto community has criticized Telegram previously for rolling their own cryptographic protocols that are not reviewed. Any updates on that? One of you want to wave at me and answer that? Is that something that?
Well, just very quickly, it's not really related to our question. I think it's related to attempt to monetize platform I talked about, and it failed because U.S. government applied essentially the kind of sanction. They said, we just don't allow you to create this cryptocurrency because it's fraud, or it would look like fraud. So they just abandoned the attempt. And now actually there are rumors that Durov might sell Telegram to Russian oligarch. That's why one of the reasons it could be deblocked or allowed in Russia again now, which is allowed, but it's just a rumor.
Mm-hmm. Hannah, someone's actually just asked a question that I was gonna direct at you, which is from Vinicius Fortuna, who says one question his head is whether the internet censorship backfired by pushing everyone to the one place that worked, which was Telegram. I was actually on a call earlier in the summer with a group of Belarusian sort of independent journalists who were they'd all been knocked offline. I mean, these were mostly online publications. And one of the effects of taking over state journalism, making the state media sort of unwatchable and such bad propaganda that nobody believes anymore, and knocking all other forms of independent journalism out so that nobody could access anything other than state media. Maybe one of the effects of that was to push people onto Telegram, and maybe that's part of the explanation of it. In other words, we have the Lukashenko to thank for the success of this platform. I don't know, what do you think, Hannah?
Well, actually, Durov, I think, tweeted that he has to be grateful for to Lukashenko for kind of making such great PR for Telegram. So yeah, I think it's a logical consequence of kind of not allowing independent media, independent sources of information to kind of exist and journalists to work freely in the country. But I would expand that. I would talk, I think, about trust in social media, in Telegram, in independent media and bloggers. I think that's an important question to ask. Why actually, why is it happening? Why are people, listening? Why are people reading? And why are people following it so kind of eagerly, right? Because, well, blocking independent media or like independent websites doesn't have to lead to kind of making Telegram popular, right? But it actually did. In Belarus, right? So because, well, Telegram was and bloggers and also independent media were popular before the election, and trust in them increased immensely. And actually the pandemic is one of the reasons, because Lukashenko lied, state media lied immensely, and people saw that basically both social media and independent media were saving their lives, because they saw that there is information, like objective and kind of real statistics and real conversation about the danger and the kind of scale of the coronavirus. And they felt, I would say, grateful to journalists for doing this. Mm-hmm. And as an effect to social media as well, because that's where kind of, journalists were also spreading information, and, social media were kind of cooperating with independent media. I would say this is now one structure in Belarus. That's something, this connection is more than just, this is not another source of information. This is more on this emotional level, because people now feel that, well, they are playing on the same side, right? So these folks saved, in a way, our lives and health. So we kind of trust them. And that explains this popularity.
I was going to say that's really interesting, because what you've just said is almost the mirror opposite of what happened in Western countries. Namely, what you've just said is that what people were reading on social media seemed more real and more accurate to them than anything else. And, particularly during the pandemic, they felt that the only real information they could get was from social media. Whereas, my reaction to social media is that's the last place I would go to find out anything that's real. But you're saying that in Belarus exactly the opposite is true. I also wanted to get, Franek, you talked about this already a little bit when we were talking about Nekta. I wanted to get a little bit deeper into this question of trust and who people trust and why they listen to one group over another. Because it's pretty clear that these demonstrations are made possible by, do you mind turning your microphone off until actually the second you talk, because otherwise we can hear the echo. But it's pretty clear that people are trusting. Not only are they trusting what they read on the popular Telegram channels, they're also following directions. So when Nekta or when one of the other channels says, right, this morning there's going to be a demonstration and it's at 10 o'clock and we're all going to march, to this one particular place, and then afterwards we're going to do something else, people rely on that and do it. And that's a very deep level of trust. And I'm wondering where that comes from. Is it experience? Is it accuracy? Is it because the leaders of these channels come from the kinds of backgrounds that you all come from, these underground schools? Is there what underlies this source of trust?
I think all the factors matter that you mentioned. First of all this information is systematic. It is organized. It follows one style. Yes, this is a bit aggressive, a bit political, very activist style, but people receive it from all the major channels at the same time. So they understand that it's not the provocation of one channel against another one, but 10 biggest channel, they share the same plan for each rally, for each protest, for each march every Sunday. And week after week, people just got used to this, and that they have habit already to check each Friday night what is the plan for tomorrow. Each Saturday night, they check what is the plan for the march on Sunday. And this creates the habit. So it's not just the habit of reading news from these channels, but also the habit to receive instructions. And it's very comfortable to people because on one hand, you're receiving the very clear messaging. I have to put the flag on my window tomorrow. I have to bring such poster. I have to take this flag. So it just coordinates people. People feel comfortable. They shouldn't brainstorm. What should I do? How can I do? How can I protest? They know. And when the general strategy of resistance was published, the plan of victory on the Nekta channel, on Belarus of the Brain channel, people were very happy because finally they realized that all these activities, all these rallies, it's not just taken out of the blue, but it's the part of the bigger plan. And they understand that this plan is well thought. And that's very important because even the selection of the route of the march, it's very important issue. And people realize that these guys behind Telegram channels, they spend hours thinking about what is the best route. And there is trust which emerged because there was no moment, there was no second when the trust was disappeared, was broken.
But that means, you don't have to give me any details of this. That means there's clearly coordination between the people who are running these different channels. So there's some.
There is full coordination, and all major channels coordinate between each other. They coordinate to political leaders. They coordinate with everything. They even coordinated with campaigns of candidates. And there are no foreigners, coordinating like Lukashenko said. he really believes that foreigners from Netherlands, Czech Republic, Poland, and United States are behind these channels. The real young Belarusian girls and guys do all this stuff, and they just united. They agreed to work together this campaign and to abolish dictatorship. And this common goal is the main value and the glue which keeps them all together.
It's funny, you know, I've even thought over the summer, I mean, I have, you know, really despaired of the, we were talking before we all went online, of the Western reaction and how relatively weak it had been and how divided the West seems to be. There is a sense in which, though, I mean, it's not that it's good, but it's useful in another way, because there is just no way you can argue that this is a Western plot, because there is no unified Western view of Belarus. So there's clearly no Western involvement in these protests, and it's very obvious that it's that it's grassroots, and it's surely obvious to Belarusians as well. I mean, I know that in some other countries, authoritarian leaders have convinced at least a part of the population that, you know, that protests are foreign. I mean, this is a tactic that Putin uses often by saying, you know, they're not really Russians, they're being paid by somebody, they're paid by Soros, they're paid by Americans, and therefore you honest, patriotic Russians can ignore them. And that's so obviously not the case in Belarus, that it actually, I would think, plays to the opposition's advantage. Alexander, there was a question earlier, I've now lost who it was from, which asked about the replicability of the success that there's been in Belarus. Are the tactics used by here it is for Chloe Dyer, tactics used by Belarusian protesters, could they be effectively replicated in other places, or is this unique to this? I mean, you're somebody who has studied the internet, the interaction between the internet and protest in more than one place. What do you think about that question?
Yeah, right. Just to tell you very, 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 very short story about my own experience about. So I believe both my colleagues from Belarus have been interviewed by the media many times about Belarus over the last couple of weeks and months. But maybe not that many people have been interviewed by authors from the mainland China. And I was one of the privileged. And you know what happened to my the article that was partly my interview for mainland China offer? They published it, and in 10 minutes it'd been censored by WeChat. WeChat is kind of a giant platform. It's Amazon plus Facebook plus Telegram plus everything. So they censored it in 10 minutes. It shows that authoritarian countries are afraid of this type of things spreading to them, including China, which looks very powerful, yeah, and sort of very stable, which wasn't really during January 2020. So I think what I think this from the perspective of often offline protests, we observe very interesting kind of type of mobilization in this urban 21st century digitally empowered mobilization in urban cities, kind of when protests were not really on the main square of the city, but somewhere in the suburbs of Minsk and other towns. It's in itself an interesting phenomenon. But at the same time, in terms of digital kind of organizing, that's what I studied, researched, indeed in more than one country. I found similar patterns emerging in terms of mobilization through digital means, in terms of how leadership and organization looks in many countries. Recently, it would be Lebanon, to be Sudan, for instance. When in both of those countries, people have been asked, by Lebanon, I mean previous kind of way of protest before the explosion. When I ask activists there, who are your leaders, for instance, who is leading the process, who is mobilizing? The answers are very similar, very, very kind of similar answers I heard in Belarus 3 years ago, and I heard at the very beginning of this protest as well, that like we don't know. And some people, some administrators of those accounts on whatever platform is popular. So in a way, we observe kind of similar kind of patterns of organizing in less free societies and troubled societies, and not necessarily even in not democratic societies. But at the same time, currently kind of, I think what's happening now is indeed Belarusian movement become more institutionalized, and it's an important next stage. So there are different kind of ways to create solid structures. Maybe we're going to talk about it a bit later. But when you asked about coordination, I was a bit puzzled. What do Franek means by coordination, and what do other mean by coordination? Is it decision-making process that is kind of when decisions making made, then everyone must follow, or just communication and exchanging of messages? Because I think the second type of kind of coordination, that's what I see in many cases. But maybe something else is happening now to Belarus. It will be very interesting to learn.
Franek, do you want to answer that?
With sound.
Yeah, I'm here. So regarding coordination, yes, should I reveal all the cards here?
No, don't.
No.
Is it more about communication, or it's more about decision making?
It's about decision making. It's about
Okay.
decision making, and that's. I must say that this revolution is managed by journalists in all senses, and because journalists actually inspired people, journalists revealed all the stories. These stories sparked the interest and anger, and journalists involved in Telegram channels, not just the biggest, not Nechta, but Nechta also is journalist. But I think 80% of Telegram channels are owned and managed by journalists. So, and the journalists managed to coordinate and to be a bit of activists somehow. And now it's about coordination, communication, mutual understanding, and listening to each other. And this is the ingredients of this success. And also journalists know how to put things in a beautiful way as well, because I think Belarusian politicians for many years, they failed to do this.
Can I challenge you on that? I mean, do you really mean journalists? I mean, somebody like Nechta isn't able, for example, to do the work of and this is not a criticism of him, it's just a fact. You know, he's not able to go and, for example, check up on when somebody sends him a video or a piece of information. He can't do the background check or the interview or the kind of work that you would think of a journalist doing. And one of the criticisms, not just of him, but more generally of this method of organizing, is that there isn't an editorial process in the traditional sense. There aren't journalists bringing in information. There's a big chance that something fake or something altered or something out of context could accidentally appear online. So is this really journalism, or is it something else?
This is the journalism of modern era. And I must say that all these guys working on Telegram channels, they do the work of the whole newsroom. You receive 3,000-4,000 pieces a day of videos and photos, and you choose 5% of them. 95% are filtered, are censored. So you have to choose, you have to quickly check the facts, you need to know the context. Of course, you have the team, and the Nechta and Belarus of the Brain and My Country Belarus and Mustaches of Lukashenko, all the channels have fact checkers. Of course, there are many mistakes, but basically they do the first journalism filter. They prepare the content, which is already cleaned somehow, and later the traditional journalists, they go to Nechta and they receive the pre-prepared content. It's not raw anymore, it's already filtered. And they make another round of cleaning and editorial process right there. But the most important filtering is made by Nechta, and without journalism knowledge, without journalist skills, they will never succeed.
Interesting. Hannah, I wanted to address to you another point that somebody's made, which also suggests this is a little bit more than journalism. Ned Garvey writes that he notices that many of the protests incorporate a lot of performance and art. And on the internet, the Telegram channels post memes and humor. And he asks, what role does this kind of stuff play in creating solidarity and sustaining the movement? So to talk a little bit about the role of culture, the role of music, the role of comedy, and some of the other, some of the other skills basically that people are using to create solidarity.
Yeah, I think humor actually for years was something that kind of saved Belarusians. There were so many jokes, there were so many memes recently about Lukashenko, he is the main meme generator. And I think for people, it's a way, obviously, how to kind of, fight, and also how to kind of cope with the situation. And it's also a natural reaction when they are scared. It's kind of, this on emotional level, they prefer to laugh it off. It does, well, culture generally, and actors, musicians, in all kind of, all over the country, actually, they joined the protest physically, but also by helping out to create, these banners or these ads, they're doing kind of a lot of things. And this is just part of the movement. What we are talking about now in Belarus, it's a popular uprising. It's an uprising of all social groups. So no wonder that actors, musicians, and all kind of cultural like workers, I would say, they joined it, right? People just keep singing, and songs are, so we even created like a list of songs of the protests, right? Because this is also very important. And musicians also join, they kind of try to inspire, they try to support people, and that's kind of what also, helps people, right, a lot. And most recently, all these kind of flash mobs on subways, in the International Library, outside theaters, even this, the building on Philharmonic, right? Like, it's just kind of another way of protesting, right? So people just are trying to choose the format of how to protest safely, and that's one of it, right? As well as women came out to the streets at some point and started, organizing these rallies. The same way artists, musicians, they are kind of doing the same. They are both present on the streets, but they are kind of, creating also this value, this, street art or songs or, whatever they can do.
Mm-hmm. And then I suppose the fact that all these things are then multiplied because they're visible on Telegram to 2 million people gives them extra power, right?
Yeah. Also, like, this kind of images and street art is also very important. People are just, so inspired. They just go and, paint their yards, their kind of walls in their where they live, walls of their apartments, and that's how they kind of show that they are they are opposing Lukashenko and this, whole police brutality, and they're against the situation. So it's also kind of this visual part of it has also become very important.
That's so interesting. There's a kind of conversation going on in the chat that that made me think there's another question for you, Alexander. It's about Natalia Krapiva writes that Sandvine, the U.S. company that provided shutdown equipment to the Belarus government, has just announced they're asking for the equipment to be returned. And then there are a couple of other people talking about the Western companies who have lent, there's, some evidence of Western companies lending things like, electric shock equipment and tear gas machine, whatever equipment to authoritarian regimes. Is there can you think a little bit more deeply about kind of Western technology and Western companies? And, we were talking before about what Western governments can do about Belarus. Is there something you'd like to see Western companies do? Whether it's the tech companies, whether it's the equipment companies, what should Western companies do? And is that a pressure point we should be using? Should we be trying to organize them to help the demonstrators in Belarus? Why don't you ask that first, Alexander, and then I see Franek nodding, and others can answer as well.
All right, yeah, and then I start. Well, regarding equipment mentioned in the section, indeed, there was technologies of deep inspection of traffic I mentioned being applied by the Belarusian government, and this technology was supported by equipment that was manufactured or prepared or created in the United States. And it shows that, well, it feels like that could be the area of pressure where governments of the West might think about how to prevent this type of technologies being used again. And in fact, Western technology has been constantly used by authoritarian governments to censor content, to surveil. Swedish technologies as well were popular in that regard. So I think there is still huge space for kind of law enforcement and sort of maybe a creation of additional sanction regimes that technologies that can be used for censorship can be spread and sent and sold to countries like Belarus until they are democratic. Then the question is, of course, what can be done? And I think what Telegram did in the first couple of days of lockdown was quite good. The company kind of applied its various tools and technologies it developed to overcome lockdown in Iran, in Russia, to help users in Belarus to access Telegram. And it was partly successful. We saw that my research showed that about 45% of users of most popular internet groups, chats, those protest chats on Telegram that were important for organizing events in the couple of first days, they were online. So out of 140,000 people, about 70,000 were online during the lockdown, during last night of lockdown, which shows that it was popular way and Telegram helped people to overcome. And I think other companies can do the same. They can think, Google can think, other platforms can think about how to help, but also, in fact, this is something that foreign governments must think about, not just companies. There is huge pressure now in the West on companies to monitor content, obviously for very legitimate reasons, because there is a lot of manipulative content, far-right extremism, and all other very, very unfortunate content that published, and also kind of pressure to de-anonymize users, right? And I think that's what's really dangerous for countries like Belarus. I think if platforms like Facebook would pressure further its users to be more open, kind of revealing their names and other private data, it can be very dangerous for activists, digital activists. So we should always balance this sort of very legitimate request to the companies to make them more transparent, and also to show that their content is not manipulated, and at the same time protect more vulnerable population, vulnerable users in not that free countries. I think that's important to think about.
Mm-hmm. Franek, you wanted to say something about this too. You were nodding vigorously.
First of all, before this revolution and everything, and Google and Facebook and technology companies, they actually did listen and did collaborate with Belarus government. If we have a look to government requests on deletion of the content because of national security reasons, Google in most cases deleted this content. And only right now, I think there will be a kind of reconsideration of policy and collaboration with Belarus government. Of course, because most of the requests potentially can be motivated by politics. But what I wanted to say that basically another angle of the problem, technology companies did not recognize Belarus as the sovereign state and did not recognize Belarus language. And this was the big problem. For example, Belarus service of Radio Free Europe was not able to promote its content on Google Ads because Belarusian language is not supported by Google. And all the ads were sent to Moscow because all the foreign companies and Facebook and Google who work on Belarus, they work through the Moscow's offices. And in fact, when we speak about Belarus language content, when we speak about Belarus issue, about Belarus politics, about some complaints, everything went through Moscow. And of course, the Moscow moderators, they were seeing the situation from Moscow perspective in most cases, but not always. And still now we have the problem with Belarusian language on on these larger platforms. And there is no Google news in Belarusian language, for example. So Belarusians were exposed to Russian news, to Russian propaganda for many years, because Google was feeding us with Russian news outlets mixed with the Belarusian news outlets.
Well, that's really interesting. Let me pick up a question from our sort of moderator, Alexander Sikorsky, who asks whether protesters in Belarus have been consciously drawing inspiration from other protest movements around the world. And so, you know, obviously the Hong Kong protesters also use Telegram, and we can also now see this tactic of spontaneous protests in Belarus is similar to the things that we saw in Hong Kong over the last 6 months. Is that deliberate or is that an accident?
Yeah, I think Hong Kong actually became like one of the closest kind of regions to Belarus right now. I receive kind of so many comments on Twitter, you know, that Hong Kongers are with Belarusians. So it's really inspiring to see. Well, this kind of spontaneity, right? These spontaneous actions, rallies, or, you know, this kind of protest, let's say small protests, are also very interesting. Like all of a sudden, a small group or a larger group of people would appear, you know, on subway, let's say, and they would start singing, or they would move somewhere, that they would just disperse very quickly. It's kind of very interesting. I think this experience, obviously, well, the world is globalized, right? So they kind of, you know, people know what's happening elsewhere, so they can easily kind of, you know, take this practice, follow the example, and use it in your country. Also, that's kind of what, it's also very logical in Belarus, because, well, the country, the system is kind of so controlled, is so, let's say, well maintained. So only kind of your spontaneous decisions, you know, you go, you rally, and then you just change your way, and then you kind of move forward and so on. You're just trying to disappear, and then you come back. It proves very successful in Belarus in the past weeks, right? That's what people have been doing. The authorities, the police would think that, oh, we've dispersed these guys, and then after 5 minutes they would come back. And yeah, it's kind of very interesting. Also, the protest is very decentralized, especially in the past weeks, and especially like on a working day, not on Sundays, let's say, when all kind of thousands of people would gather in the city center. But usually people, like on Monday and Wednesday, usually people would gather in their districts, in their neighborhoods, and they would, you know, talk to each other. They would dance. They would again sing. They would paint their, you know, walls or whatever. So this is, you know, grassroots. This is decentralized. This is very spontaneous, and yet at the same time, it's very well organized. You know, people seem, you know, be ready, be prepared for you know, for everything what they're doing. So that's kind of very interesting.
Right, fascinating. Alexander, you were nodding. Do you want to add to that? Yeah, Alex.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Just no, absolutely agree. Just a couple of days, I think yesterday actually, Nechta shared this key channel that Franek mentioned, you mentioned, everyone mentioned, 2 million followers, largest news Telegram channel in the world. Just yesterday shared, I think, it wasn't I don't know, it wasn't Nechta or someone else shared video from Hong Kong that clearly kind of shows an instruction how to be think like water. So essentially there is clearly exchange of ideas between these two very, very far away movements. In fact, I don't think people in Hong Kong heard that much about Belarus before, but now some of them learned, and it's great to see. But other thing actually, what Hanan mentioned, and it's what didn't happen, for instance, I think that much during other movement many people compare to Euromaidan movement. I mean, yes, sorry. Many people compare Belarusian, or at the beginning they compared it to Euromaidan, which is not very good comparison maybe. During Euromaidan, there was not much of that kind of very local kind of grassroots, very kind of local organizing, very local sort of socializing, growing social capital. Didn't happen. That's what I think actually brings, for me at least, it shows that. And I think that's what a source of optimism for me in a way, this type of local, very local organizing, socializing, because it helps people to get together, to learn about each other, finally to meet their neighbors, and those local web chats we created on Telegram, they will be used later on, whatever happens in the end, whatever the outcome, they will be used for political purpose, for no political purpose, for some kind of organizing for just very local interest groups, whatever. And it will be, it's even appear to even more important for kind of for the growth of our sort of civil society in Belarus than many other processes that we see now on the surface. So this is, I would say, even more kind of more important than some of the other events.
That actually leads me very naturally to what I guess will be our sort of final round of questions and conversation, in which I did want to start talking a little bit about the future. There's one question here about what are the next steps, and you just implied that in your answer. I mean, unfortunately, there was a moment this summer when I did think Lukashenko might step down or go abroad and live together with his money, which is, you know, in foreign countries. But it doesn't look like right now that's going to happen. I mean, maybe just to finish off, why doesn't each of you talk a little bit about how you see the movement going, how the use of technology is going to change, what will be the, we do see that there have been, as Alexander said, there has been a sea change in the way that people see themselves in their country over the last few weeks. There has been the creation of a real civic movement in which people have new relationships now that didn't exist before. How will we use that? How will you use that? And what, there are a lot of obstacles obviously still to overcome. And what do you think happens next? Who would like to go first? I don't know, Franek.
Okay, I can start. I like to speak about future. So first of all, it's not just about technology, it's about people, as Alexander often likes to repeat. And technology just facilitates, it's catalyzes process. And right now, Telegram and other stuff, YouTube, Instagram, they catalyze, the transformation, digital transformation, social transformation, political transformation of Belarus. And this dynamics, the group dynamics, which we have right now in Belarus society, it will help not just to win this revolution, but also to reform Belarus of the future. And I think thanks to this character of Belarus uprising, for example, to introduce e-governance in Belarus after Lukashenko will be much, much easier. To build and to impose all these digital schemes, technologies, automated data collections, all the stuff related to the effective governance with the use of technologies will be possible in the country. And I think Belarus will avoid many mistakes and many problems of other countries that were in a similar situation after abolishing long-year dictatorship.
Mm-hmm. Alexander.
My take would be a bit different, and I would start to think what's going to happen. I think it's good also. It's a good idea to ask what been before and look at the past and think about a question I have no answer to. Why Belarus was that unusual case of European country? For a long time, it was the only authoritarian country, yes? Recently, more countries joined the club, but anyway, it's quite unusual case, right? Why this authoritarianism existed? So before, many people, and I was inclined to answer in the same way as well, think about, well, maybe something is wrong with sort of how we emerged from Soviet Union, and sort of there was no this kind of maybe formed nation. Maybe there was something wrong with kind of society in general, kind of accepted and was happy with authoritarianism, but it doesn't seem like a case anymore, right? And maybe we were wrong. Maybe it was just the idea that people supported Lukashenko and his regime broadly. It was a myth. Maybe it was never a case at all. We don't know really, but it looks like increasingly the case now, right? So people don't really support the regime anymore. And I think, in fact, there's only one great factor that, or couple of them, that really on which this current regime rests. It's not clearly popular support totally. It's just this very strong police system that holds everything together so far. And the other thing is Russia. Yeah, this black knight. There is a theory of black knights in political science, that kind of foreign states that pushes for sort of, or does not allow democratization in smaller, sort of weaker countries, neighboring countries, and that's what the Russian role is. Yeah. So while with the first factor we can't really do much, yeah, in Belarus, but the first one, the second we can't do much, right? We can't do much about Russia. It will remain always a factor in that equation. But I think with the security apparatus, it later or soon would something would happen. Cracks already appeared, and in that case, yeah, I think that's where we should look at very carefully, yeah. And the last factor, of course, is society, and that's why I mentioned I'm quite positive. I'm optimistic looking at how Belarusian society changes rapidly, and clearly there will be consequences, and there will be sort of stronger social ties that would allow Belarus to emerge from this crisis and as a better, I hope, a better country.
I do hope that's correct. Hannah, maybe you could answer as well. And there was in the very beginning, there was a question I saw you responding to in the chat about the perception of women and how that might have changed thanks to this social movement. And I mean, you don't have to say a lot about that, but are there other deeper changes that have happened? Are there ways in which people are going to see each other differently or see the society differently? You write quite deeply about some of these issues. What do you think is the, not so much the short-term outcome, but what are the medium and longer-term outcomes of this summer of protest?
I think the level of politicization and the kind of willingness of people to take matters in their hand will be one of the consequences, will be one of the most important outcomes of this uprising. First success happened in 2017 when people were able to force Lukashenko by protesting, to ban this tax on the unemployed. It was later reintroduced, but kind of this first success, they went out to the streets and they kind of achieve something, and they saw that they are able to do something, to be successful, to kind of bring about change by their actions. And in the past years, this mobilization and this self-organization has been on the rise. It didn't happen on the 9th of August. I think it's a kind of big stereotype, right? That the nation just was sleepy and then it all of a sudden woke up. It was not sudden, and I think it's even more available, when it's not sudden, right? People were kind of getting ready for this situation. Why it didn't happen before, Alexander? Because this regime was kind of hybrid. Many people were not affected by repressions. And after the 9th of August, basically the whole country saw, in black and white colors, that this is bad, like this has to be changed, right? Everyone was affected all of a sudden, I think. Also, there was no event before that would unite the whole country. First, it was the pandemic, right? And this kind of dangers and the scale of, basically danger to life and health. And before, after the election, it was this, again, level of repression, right, that again united the country. We have 12,000 people who were arrested, so since the election, and it's an immense number. So I imagine someone asked about these democratic institutions, and that's what Belarusians have been creating basically in the past years. Civil society has been more resourceful and effective than the state during the pandemic. It basically kind of saved, delivered help to hospitals and doctors, and eventually saved many lives, during the pandemic, not the government. So to kind of, that was also kind of another reason why people saw that, well, the government is not able to do this. Why should we support it, right? Because, well, we have civil society, we have this third sector that is actually more capable to kind of, to do what the government was supposed to do essentially. So again, politicization, mobilization, self-organization, and kind of this, willingness to kind of, took matters in their hand. And well, again, people were able to fight and to kind of achieve some sort of freedom, even if it was like for one day. They were able to gather in thousands, and they thought that they won. But this kind of understanding, this feeling of freedom, would not be possible to take back, and that would stay with them after even if this particular protest, like this particular uprising, does not succeed, but next time, next month, next year, this will come back, because, well, there is a number of reasons for this discontent, but also there is, this kind of understanding that, well, they want to be free. So I think that's kind of the main outcome. And as to the role of women, just very briefly, it will, well, I mean, it's already changing, obviously. Svetlana Tikhanovskaya proved that she's capable of becoming a politician, and she was basically most certainly elected by Belarusians. Again, we see a female politician, right? A successful female politician. So this kind of stereotype that a woman is not capable of ruling the country would change. And well, women are protesting on the same level as men do. So that's kind of, like this gender equality, I would say, will also prevail and will kind of have effects.
Mm-hmm. So on those relatively, actually amazingly optimistic and positive conclusions, which are really nice to hear, I guess we should draw this to a close. I feel like we hit the most important themes, the way in which technology is being used and the way it's beginning to affect people's relationships to one another. And I hope that everybody listening who is not from Belarus, who's from another country and is thinking about organizing there, will watch closely what goes on in Belarus, and wish them luck, as do I. So thank you very much. Thanks for joining. And I know there's an ongoing program for the Oslo Freedom Forum, and I hope people stay and watch that. So thank you very much. Thanks to my three guests. They're really three very brave people, and I applaud them, and I'm glad I was able to be here tonight with them. Thanks very much.